This one is going to be fun, except when we were putting the notes together yesterday, we immediately realized that there was one good video we left from last week. So we're really going to finish up, what did we do last week? Social justice. We're going to finish up social justice for the video. Here's what's funny. I'm sitting here writing, and I was looking at some notes Meredith wrote here in the week. She said, we'll probably use maybe 4 minutes of this video. Well, as I'm writing stuff and I'm listening to it, previewing the video, and all of a sudden I'm writing, oh look, that connects here, and I'm doing all these connections, and then I look down and realize it's more than 4 minutes. I thought she had sent me a 4-minute video. No, she sent me the whole 45-minute video, and I was at minute 11 already. So we're actually going to show 11 minutes of this, which we didn't originally intend to, but it fits so well, and it bridges into race. And this one is actual Tucker Carlson is what this one's from. All right, we'll start here with our mission. You have one job, only one job. Actually, I'm going to skip that because we'll get that later. Your mission will not change. I'm going to skip that too. All right, here's your review from last week. The social justice movement is concerned with the fair treatment of groups in this world, while the gospel is concerned with the individual's salvation and relationship with God for eternity. That's just one sentence that says, hey, that's the biggest difference right there. Social justice movement, temporal, this world, how's everybody treated fair? The gospel is not focused temporally. It is focused on eternity and your salvation. It's an individual thing versus a group thing. It's temporal, meaning this world, versus eternity. They are two different structures and two different worldviews, two different ways of seeing the world. Social justice groups are asking you, this is what they're generally asking you. Social justice groups are asking you to make them the arbiter of justice, but no sinful person or group has the divine perspective. We talked about that by looking at Job the last 2 weeks. The divine perspective of God, and thus cannot establish their own justice apart from God. So they're asking you to let them be the arbiters of justice apart from God in a secular world. And what we looked at Job and many other places in the Bible is that's impossible. We cannot do that. You must have an objective standard, and the objective standard is the Word of God. One thing you know, you're going to see that this week. What you know, one thing about the social justice movement, the racial issues, Black Lives Matter, is I like the way John Leffler calls it the pitching deck of moral relativism, like a ship. Every time an issue, which is the wave, every time an issue hits the ship throws, it pitches, the deck pitches one way or the other because you're in a storm, and every time, so think of each one of those waves as another issue, and the moral relativism, instead of being a stable set of morals, your Bible, that never change so you can handle these issues, they flip and they flop, and all of a sudden, that's why you can get two parts of these movements that are completely contradictory, and they will argue you to the death. It's because they have a moral relativism. They have a set of morals that are constantly flipping depending on what the situation is. Because what they're really concerned about is the outcome, not a standard. So anyway, and you're going to see that these two issues, social justice and race, overlap. All right, so, you got to hit our theme verse from last week, Micah 6. Again, about justice. What does God require of you? Micah 6:8 is so beautiful. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love mercy. We hit on that hard the last 2 weeks about mercy, that God is fully just, but he moderates his justice with mercy and grace. We hit that hard the last 2 weeks. What does he require of you? But to do justice, to love mercy, and here's the key, to walk humbly with your God. Because if you're humble in the face of God, you will not be judgmental in the negative sense. But you are called to this idea that, doesn't the Bible say I'm not to judge? No, that is completely out of context. You're supposed to be fruit inspectors. What does a fruit inspector do? He judges the quality of fruit. You are to judge. You are to judge appropriately using the standard that God sets forth in humility and in love. Judgment does not necessarily, it doesn't at all in our perspective. Judgment, making a correct judgment doesn't lead to conviction or punishment. That's God. We don't convict another person. We don't punish another person. But of course you're to judge. You judge every day. You are expected to judge in this world, to assess fruit. Anyway, okay. That wasn't in the notes. I just thought about that. Final word on social justice. Who is setting our priorities? And I'm going to get mad about this. I had to write this down here. Where's the church? So I'm at Roman numeral 3. Final word on social justice. Who is setting our priorities? Where is the church? Politics, I could care less. And the reason I'm saying that is because, this is Tucker Carlson, this interview. So, he's political, he's very conservative. I want you to understand, I could care less about the politics. What I care about is truth. And quite often I do like Tucker Carlson. A lot of times, man, he has a way of getting to the truth. He has a way of making an issue look clear because he doesn't play around with a bunch of platitudes. Anyway. So, but this has nothing to do with politics. I could care less about that. What does God want? That's my question to y'all. What does God want?
Family.
There it is. I knew somebody said, don't get this. What does God want? We did this several months ago. He wants a family. I forget if I had those books. God wants a family. What was my next question there? And what is your job?
CB got it.
CB, jump in there, CB. That's it. So I'm saying that because I don't care anything about the politics, but we're going to use this article because Tucker does a good job of getting you into the article. Okay, so this is the wrap up of social justice. Why Christians must engage. Tucker Carlson, Black Lives Matter on the moon. Black Lives Matter on the moon. Yes, the moon. Big thing you see at night. Look at this.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. When the Apollo 11 astronauts returned from the world's first moon landing back in the summer of 1969, America rejoiced. Returning heroes were greeted with ticker tape parades in cities of the country and then around the world. By the end of it, the astronauts had visited 24 countries. They'd waved to millions of adoring fans. They met Queen Elizabeth and then the Pope. But back home, not everyone was impressed. There's always somebody. And in New York City, that man was a jazz musician called Gil Scott-Heron. He watched the moon landing and he noticed it was awfully white. In fact, he decided it was far too white to be legitimate. So in response to this, in 1970, Gil Heron released a spoken word piece entitled Whitey on the Moon. Here's a selection.
I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. The taxes taking my whole damn check. The junkies make me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And as if all that crap wasn't enough, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon.
Taxes taking my whole damn check. Junkies making me nervous. Price of food going up, and a rat bit my sister. But Whitey's on the moon. Gil Scott-Heron wrote that more than 50 years ago, and actually, if you think about it, not a lot has changed, at least in the positive direction. The price of food is rising faster than ever. Taxes have not gone down. Junkies are everywhere. The cities are still a mess. Joe Biden has been president of the United States for more than a year, and he hasn't fixed any of that. Honestly, he hasn't even really tried to fix it. It's all gotten worse, measurably worse. But Biden does plan to make one improvement, however. There will be no more Whiteys on the moon. Biden's going to diversify space travel. Tucked away in the administration's latest $6 trillion budget proposal is $7.5 billion to, quote, land the first woman and person of color on the moon. Gil Scott-Heron is gone now, but imagine if he had lived.
Did you hear that? Did you hear? I want y'all to hear what he just said. How much money did he say is set aside for that project? $7.5 billion. Just hold that in your head. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
See this moment. You can imagine the tears of joy and gratitude. After 50 years, Whitey has finally been vanquished from the moon. We are free. We are finally free. In a sense, anyway. It doesn't mean the cities are any better. If you live in Baltimore, for example, there's still a pretty good chance your sister could be bitten by a rat. She could definitely be killed in a drive-by shooting. Baltimore is more dangerous than it's ever been. The city's murder rate is higher than El Salvador's. Baltimore is more than 60% black. The overwhelming majority, almost every murder victim in the city is also black. So you would think that would count as some kind of civil rights violation. It seems like one, all those dead black people, all those grieving African-American families. But strangely, Joe Biden, the civil rights president, never mentions Baltimore. And that's weird. Maybe he doesn't know what's going on in Baltimore. But he probably does because it's all over the news. Watch.
7 shootings in less than 4 hours Friday.
It's scary.
Back in the Otterbein neighborhood, residents are now feeling uneasy about an area they always thought was safe.
As crime continues to surge in Baltimore, city police are trying to tackle that crisis while also facing one of their own, as their ranks seem to dwindle by the day. Our cameras caught what appears to be one of those open-air drug deals happening in broad daylight.
This year, 311 has gotten a call just about every 10 minutes for dirty alleys and dirty streets and illegal dumping.
According to Baltimore police data, there were 341 homicides and 738 shootings in the city last year.
You see those numbers? 738 shootings in the city of Baltimore, 341 murders just last year. And you'd think someone would care about that. For perspective, that is far more people than died in the Tulsa race riot, Tuskegee syphilis experiments, and Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama combined. And it didn't just happen once, it happens every year.
1 year.
Yet there's been no mention from Joe Biden of Baltimore. There's been no federal response to Baltimore, no troops deployed, no Justice Department investigation. There's been no real acknowledgement that it's even happening. What is this? Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the equity agenda distilled. 341 murders in one city mean nothing compared to the theoretical promise of a black lady on the moon. We're gonna have a black lady on the moon. You're free, you're finally free, so stop complaining. Ignore your unraveling life. We've got a symbolic victory for you. No, you can't eat it. It won't keep you safe from gunfire, but you're gonna love it. And if you're still not satisfied with your life in Baltimore after that symbolic victory, here's another. According to the White House today, this is Transgender Appreciation Day. And Joe Biden has informed us we'll call trans senior citizens. But it's better than Christmas because we don't have to buy presents, which, in case you haven't noticed, have gotten much more expensive recently. So this is the cheapest, best holiday ever. All we have to do is bathe in the reflected glory of transgender rights. Here's the president to explain.
These are senior
The
citizens.
onslaught of anti-transgender state laws attacking you and your families is simply wrong. This administration is standing up for you against all these hateful bills. And we're committed to advancing transgender equality in the classroom, on the playing field, at work, in our military, in our housing and healthcare systems, everywhere, simply everywhere. Today, we're announcing even more steps, but there's always more work to do to end the epidemic of violence against transgender women of color and girls of color, to ensure transgender seniors can age with dignity, to parents of transgender children. Affirming your child's identity is one of the most powerful things you can do to keep them safe and healthy.
So this administration is standing up for you. And those are words that every American is grateful to hear. But in this case, there's a caveat. You means trans seniors. Now, wait a second, you may wonder, as you sit down with your family to celebrate the joy of transgenderism on Transgender Appreciation Day, how many trans seniors are there in this country? No offense, but the trans thing seems pretty new. And if it's not new, how come no one had ever heard of it before, say, 4 years ago? And is securing trans rights really the biggest problem that old people in America now face? Well, don't ask, because asking is violence. And as you just heard, if there's one thing that trans people don't need more of, it's violence. As Joe Biden just told us, there is a, quote, epidemic of violence against transgender women of color in America. There is? We didn't know that. We keep track. We never heard that. We know there's an epidemic of murder in Baltimore. Hundreds and hundreds of people died just last year. But anti-trans violence is a new concept. So we went dutifully to the numbers and we checked, and here they are. According to the activist group, the Human Rights Campaign, which probably isn't skimping on the number, in 2018, there were a total of 26 transgender Americans of all colors who were killed. Around the same time, a group called the Williams Institute estimated there were a total of about 1.4 million Americans who identified as transgender. So you put those numbers together in a simple equation, and you find that the murder rate for transgendered people that year was 1.8 per 100,000. Okay. By contrast, the murder rate for the entire American population that year was 4.9 murders per 100,000. So actually, contra Joe Biden, you were a lot better off being trans than being not. Being trans was definitely a lot safer than living in Baltimore. You may not have known that. In fact, doubtless you did not know that. Joe Biden didn't mention it today because, in fact, no matter what they tell you, the people of Baltimore don't have a place in the equity agenda. And that's why you don't see them on MSNBC. They don't teach at Princeton. They're not technically oppressed, unlike doctors at, say, Wake Forest School of Medicine. They're oppressed. This week, an oppressed student doctor at Wake Forest called Cashel DeRosio tweeted about stabbing a patient who dared to mock her preferred pronoun. So in the name of trans rights, she stabbed it. She tweeted this, quote, "I had a patient I was doing a blood draw on, see my pronoun pin, and laugh loudly to the staff," Del Rosario wrote. "I missed his vein, so he had to get stuck twice." She stabbed him. Then another student at Wake Forest Medical School, a future doctor, this one called Yuen Liu, publicly called the episode karma. Karma for the patient who was stabbed. So here you have two doctors in training boasting about hurting a patient because he mocked trans rights or something like that, their pronouns. So we wanted to know what Wake Forest Medical School had to say about this. So we reached out to them. We've done it all week. We'd love to know who got stabbed. What's the name of the victim? We also want to know if these two students are going to be expelled, or will they be treating you at the free clinic soon? Doctors aren't supposed to assault their patients under any circumstances, particularly over a medical disagreement. But the dean's office at Wake Forest appears to have taken the phone off the hook. They're not answering our calls. Finally, after 2 days of hounding, the medical school's publicist told us that one of the students is taking a leave of absence, but also that, quote, "all of our procedures were followed while caring for this patient." Caring for this patient? He made fun of her pronouns, so she stabbed him. In other words, Wake Forest Medical School doesn't care that its future doctors are boasting about stabbing their political opponents. That's all within normal procedures at Wake Forest Medical School. Obviously, this will not be a big story. It's maybe the last time you ever hear of it. It'll blow over because it's not out of the ordinary. Like most medical schools, Wake Forest now admits doctors based on two criteria: their appearance and their political views. They've trained their doctors to view political dissent as violence. Respect my pronouns or I will stab you. And now these medical schools are covering for physicians who commit malpractice, who commit violence in the name of equity. Obviously, this is lawlessness, but instead of doing anything about it, instead of protecting you, the patient, our leaders are finding new ways to tell you that you deserve your punishment. So to that end, the Biden administration has just signed a new anti-lynching law. Anti-lynching? What century is this? Will it help the people of Baltimore? Probably not. That's not the point. Here's the point. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris explain.
Racial hate isn't an old problem. It's a persistent problem. A persistent problem. And I know many of the civil rights leaders here know, you heard me say it 100 times. Hate never goes away.
So today we are gathered to do unfinished business. To acknowledge the horror in this part of our history. To state unequivocally that lynching is and has always been a hate crime. And to make clear that the federal government may now prosecute these crimes as such. Lynching is not a relic of the past.
Lynching is wrong. Really? Had no idea. There are a lot of lynchings going on in the United States. Probably fewer than there are drive-by shootings in Baltimore or Detroit or Gary, Indiana, or the city that you live in. Definitely more drug ODs going on. What's the federal response to those? There isn't one. You're supposed to ignore them.
Wow. You see why when I was reviewing this, I thought we were going to use 4 minutes, and I thought, it's priorities. I wanted to go through all 3 of those because I'm like, that just blows my mind. That just blows my mind. That gives a wonderful capsule of what the social justice, the ramifications and what we're finally, the fruit that we're seeing in our culture of what's happened through the social justice movement over really about the last 30, 40 years. And of course, all that is wrapped into the race. It's all the same thing. Social justice, race, it all wraps together. And you saw that bridge through there, how much of it is related to race. And how politicians, both Republican and Democrat, they trade off of fear. That this is generally the Democratic way, and we go through another time what the Republican way is. We trade off of fear. You want to get people motivated to do something, scare them. It's the best way to motivate them. And I'm sick of it. Can you tell I'm sick of it? I'm sick of that mess. We need logical people who engage the culture and understand the underlying reason why these things are happening. And we need people to quit checking their one-sentence Instagram page and go, yeah, we should probably put a black person on the moon and realize they're going to spend $7.5 billion. I gotta quit.
We gotta explain that.
All right, I gotta stop because it just makes me so angry. All right, let me get back on our notes because you'll see where we're going with this. Okay, social justice versus real suffering in our cities. Question, are the people who are, here's my question, and I want you to answer this. Are the people who are strung out on drugs in Baltimore your family? And they are. You know the answer is yes. What does God want? He wants a family. They are your family. We do not see it that way. I don't see it that way. I probably never have. I'm starting to. I'm starting to realize these people that are begging for money out here now, guys, I can't get off. I don't roll down my window and hand $1. I can't stand that. That's not the way you help those people. We have got to focus on what helps and what's actually real. All right, I gotta quit. I gotta stay on the notes.
Needles and cocaine.
Yeah, we did that a few weeks ago.
That
Yeah.
doesn't help them either.
Okay, I want to go somewhere with this. We must engage, do your job, God wants a family. Go back to our study, 3 months ago. What does God want? He wants a family. These people are potential family. In reality, they are family. They're estranged family is what they are. And your job, which we've been saying every week during this study, the Great Commission, is to go out and recapture God's family. That includes these guys. Okay, I gotta quit. Stay on my notes. Woke priorities. Stop lynching. Protect transgender senior citizens. That is amazing to me. Didn't know we had an epidemic of transgender senior citizens to whom violence was being committed. Unbelievable.
They don't know that either.
Yeah, they don't. That's what I mean. It's trading on fear. It's all it's doing. And, well, that and making, I'm just gonna say it like this, white liberal, typically younger generation white liberals feel good about themselves because they're gonna support that. Yes, I'm gonna stop transgender. Now, I can't find any, but by goodness, I stop and it makes you feel good. I'm doing something. It's a substitute morality.
If they ever show up, I'm there for them.
That's right. Yeah, if I ever find one, I will protect them and not let anybody curse at them.
Okay.
Okay, stop, Joel. I keep telling myself, stay on the notes. We're going somewhere. I wrote priorities. Stop lynching, protects transgenders, and spend $7.5 billion to put a black female on the moon. Watch this.
What's
Rhetorical question. Yeah, think about this. What would $7.5 billion, $7.5 billion, what would that do for our inner cities? Just think about that. Does anybody have a clue what $7.5 billion
We all want to be millionaires, or even billionaires. A billionaire is just a little more than a millionaire, right? Well, more than a little. A lot more, in fact. 1 billion is 1,000 million. Sure, you knew that, but here's what it looks like. 1 million seconds is 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds is 31.75 years. Or let's say a billion is 1 meter. Since a million is 1,000th of a billion, 1 million at this scale would be 1 millimeter. So now let's see this in wealth. Beyonce is worth an estimated $355 million. That is wealthier than most people can fathom. But Amazon founder Jeff Bezos is worth an estimated $164 billion. Rich is rich, right? If Jeff Bezos' net worth was 1 acre of land, all of Beyonce's money would take up 95 square feet. That's smaller than an average American bedroom. And remember, Beyonce is still super rich. And how much of a hit would it be for Bezos to spend $1 million? That would be equivalent to the average American's net worth spending less than 50 cents. So next time you buy a $4 coffee, remember.
I love this right here. Just let that sink in. If he spent $1 million, that would be equivalent to the average American spending 50 cents. Did you get that? And watch this about the coffee. If he spends $4, finish that, stop you after that.
That's like someone with Bezos' wealth buying an $8 million private jet.
Yeah, stop, pause that.
But he's not such a bad.
So he's just showing you the difference. So when you go to Starbucks and buy a $4 coffee, for that to have the same impact on his budget, he's buying, how many million did it say?
$8 million.
An $8 million private jet is equal in his brain, or his ability to spend money. It is, your cup of coffee is equivalent to him buying a private $8 million plane.
Wow.
That is amazing. I think it's pretty cool. I don't begrudge him that. But just understand, at the point we're going to, what would $7.5 billion do in our inner cities?
Guy, Bezos pledged $2 billion to a new fund to help homelessness and education. That money can go pretty far and is about 1.2% of his net worth, about the same as the average American giving $840.
Hold that.
That's a
You
reasonable.
gotta hear that. So if he goes to charity and writes a $2 billion check, you think, oh my gosh, that's equivalent to the average person giving $800. So it's not quite, I mean, again, I'm not bashing him, I'm glad he's doing all that, it's wonderful, I'm really not, this is not about bashing him, I'm a free market person, man, make all the money you can make, I'm fine with that. But I want you to understand the difference in what's going on.
Full amount. So if you can give more than 1.2% of your net worth to charity, you are more philanthropic than the richest person in the world. Good for you. The more money you have, the more you have to lose. Bezos lost $12 billion in a stock market slide on October 10th, 2018, roughly the GDP of Mozambique. But don't feel too bad for the guy. He still has the GDP of Hungary left. But if you still have a hard time understanding exactly what 1 billion means, just remember, in terms of wealth, one Jeff Bezos equals 462 Beyoncés. And who can even picture more than one Beyonce?
And that's it.
Hey, I want to just say this, since he brought Jeff Bezos.
Bezos.
Okay, his wife gave $275 million to Planned Parenthood.
Bill Gates' wife.
But then now when you think about that, that's about $100 if you give it to him.
I mean, can you, to Planned Parenthood?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got half his net worth in the divorce, and she is systematically going through her wealth. Like what this is saying, she has more money than she can conceivably spend. So she's actually, the last 2 years, been going through systematically getting away her wealth to all these charitable organizations. Some of them good, but many of them are like the Planned Parenthoods or even worse out there that are she's actively funding, giving them so much money that they don't know what to do with it, to go out there.
They'll
and
never
get
want
things.
for money.
Yeah, the left is funding these things like crazy.
I get, and this is not what the point of this was, but since we're kind of down this route, is I guess what I mean by that is, again, I'm a free market person, man. I love stories. Growing up, when I was in business school, the big deal was Walmart. At that point, this would have been the late 80s when Walmart was really expanding. And at some point when I was in school at Millsap, Walmart became the biggest retailer in the world. Guess who the biggest retailer in the world was right before Walmart? Did anybody know who was the biggest retailer in the world? Sears and Roebuck. Anybody seen one lately? They are gone. I just love that. I love innovation. I love change. I love driving out the wheat and building up the straw. I love everything about our economic system now. With that said, and I love it. I love studying Sam Walton. All the stories of him driving up to his stores in his old pickup truck and making sure they were cleaning up the parking lot. Stuff like that. I mean, it's like, that's what it's about. It's about getting your hands dirty. But anyway, okay. Get on your notes. I love all that. Now, with that said, what you do need to understand about these massively wealthy people, and you can name them. It's Bezos, it's Soros, and Musk, and those kind of guys. And Musk is more on the libertarian side. He's in the news big time right now. Musk is buying 7.9% of Instagram. I mean, of Twitter. Yeah. What you do need to know, though, is when you get an idea of what a billion is, you've got to understand how they can buy and acquire any influence anywhere in the world they want. Now, if it's a good motive, wonderful. If it's a bad motive, not so wonderful. They can accumulate any influence they want. They can buy any government they want. They can buy influence. You got to understand with that much wealth, there's the control that they can exercise in manipulating your brain is enormous. And there's nothing you need to do about it other than just be aware. Be aware that when you get this mess coming out of all these organizations, it's people who can afford anything to inundate you, every form of your social media, every form of your ability to get information, every one of them can be hammered simultaneously with the exact same message to convince you to believe it, because it's nothing to them financially. So just understand, that's the power you're fighting in. The sad part is, I forget one of the communist guys in the past, Stalin or somebody like that, wasn't Stalin, but said basically, this is just a paraphrase, basically, the greatest way to keep a person in prison trapped, is to convince them they're not. And here's the best example of that. That's what the whole story of The Matrix is about. Y'all know The Matrix, but they're all in those pods and they're living so they don't realize the whole thing of The Matrix is they're trapped and enslaved and never realize it. Anyway, my point is that's sort of what these billionaires and the social media is doing, is it's creating a intellectual trap, and this is so not even noticed, an intellectual trap that most people are simply unaware, and that's the greatest way to keep a person enslaved, is he has no idea he's in a cage. Just wake up. Engage. Wake up. Okay. Be woke. Be real woke. Be real woke. Okay, gotta keep moving.
Another angle of that is when you see like locally with this stuff coming out about FARS and the governor and the DHS corruption, like how small that influence is. That's really just a sports influence.
Yeah.
It's not really completely a monetary influence, but there was money there. Yeah. And you know, what's sad is that's all over the place. And until light is shed, those roaches won't flee.
You're exactly right. 100%. And that's what's scary about the means of shining the light is getting more and more and more restricted as social media is and various things are either bought off or just simply censored. That's what's so dangerous about the censorship that's happening in our culture today. But what they're doing is they're convincing a new generation that negative talk is violent. So censorship is correct because we got to stop this violence. It's crazy what we're buying into.
And we were gonna we actually had one of our topics in this whole series was gonna be social media and censorship, but really that is what we're talking about
in
all
all
through
this.
this.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. The point is not that God commands you to clean the streets. That's not the point of the video, of the Baltimore video with Tucker Carlson. That's not the point. He does require, all right, let me start over. The point is not that God commands you to clean the streets. He does require you to care and to make disciples. I'm gonna say that again. He doesn't require you to go out and clean the poop off the street in Baltimore, but he does require that you care, number one, and number two, that you make disciples. That's your one job. He does require that. They are your brothers and sisters God wants back in his family, but instead the church too often has cookouts, entertainment, and Bible stories. I'm gonna stop. I'm not saying a word. What is your number one job? I am gonna read that again. The church too often has cookouts, entertainment, and Bible stories. That is not your one job. All right, now we've already sort of been on race, bridging social justice. Let's run over to race. The race is is race, it's Roman numeral 4, is race a biological category or a social category? That's the first question. And go ahead and read these definitions for us, Mary. Yeah.
Race, biological, the definition would be a group of people identified as distinct from other groups because of supposed physical or genetic traits shared by the group. Most biologists and anthropologists do not recognize race as a biologically valid classification, in part because there is more genetic variation within groups than between them.
That's really fascinating. There's more, and she and I read a bunch of articles and kind of dug into this.
And we're going to read that.
And we're going to read one in a minute, but there is more diversity, more genetic diversity within a, quote, racial group. Let's say, English, let's say Scottish, all Scottish people. Within that economic, what we would call a racial group, there's more genetic diversity within them than there is the average here in than an African. It's interesting that there's more within, and there are reasons for that. It has to do with population and limiting of knowledge, limiting of data in the genetic code, because as you get a group together that all has a similar genetic code, it's actually de-evolution, it's not evolution. I want to go into this, we may do this next
Natural
week.
selection.
It's not natural selection, it's a de-evolution. There's less information when people gather together in racial groups. It's the opposite of what the theory of evolution would tell you. It's the opposite. But anyway, let's keep going.
Social definition is a group of people united or classified together on the basis of common history, nationality, or geographic distribution.
All right, so there you have these two kind of concepts, a biological view of race and a social view of race. Article, the meaning of race. This would be, I haven't passed it out?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. She did pass it out. This would be your tan sheet. And it's big, so we're going to try to skip around a little bit, take the rest.
Tell what the article is.
You go ahead.
It's a
Course.
secular atheist professor, probably.
Probably. It's a sociology course at the University of Minnesota. We found this yesterday. I thought, that's just really good from an outside, not Christian source, just a sociological view of race.
What is race? So the learning objectives were to critique the biological concept of race, to discuss why race is a social construction, and 3, to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of a sense of ethnic identity. To understand this problem further, we need to take a critical look at the very meaning of race and ethnicity in today's society. These concepts may seem easy to define initially, but are more complex than their definitions suggest. Race. Let's first start with race, which refers to a category of people who share certain inherited physical characteristics such as skin color, facial features, and stature. A key question about race is whether it is more of a biological category or a social category.
Get that in your mind. Is it biological or is it social?
Most people think of race in biological terms, and for more than 300 years, or ever since white Europeans began colonizing populations of color elsewhere in the world, race has indeed served as the, quote, premier source of human identity.
All right, just a quick comment there. It's in the past, it was primarily viewed as a biological. That's what the whole, the founder of Planned Parenthood, what's her name? Sanger, the founder, and the whole, not genetics movement, the whole, what was her movement? Eugenics.
Yeah.
That's what all that was about. It was the biological difference of races, and there are weed races that need to be exterminated. That's what drives me insane about the number of African Americans who get abortions. Understanding that it was literally pushed and promoted by a woman who called their race a weed race that needed to be eliminated. Thus, you do abortion clinics and you put them in high crime, high poverty areas. That was a deliberate, she's writing about this. It's not a speculation. You can read all of their writings. But anyway, I'm off the notes again. This stuff drives me crazy.
The thing about it is they weren't silent about it. They
Yeah,
were open
they were
about
wide
it,
open.
but people still fell for it.
When Hitler was developing his theory of the Uber race and all that, guess what books and the information went from? Margaret Sanger's, and the folk where she was pulling it from. That prior to Margaret Sanger, that's where the whole Hitler Nazi Uber race came from, was eugenics.
Okay.
Which is,
and that actually came from Darwinism.
Yes, it's the sociological side of Darwinism.
The long, unsimplified title of Charles Darwin's book talks about races.
The better race.
100%.
Yeah.
We saw
We
that the
actually
other
came
day.
across that.
We saw the other day that they never tell you the rest of the title of his book. It's about the weed races. He doesn't use the word weed, but that's what the rest of the
Well,
title.
the Mormons are like that too.
Who?
The Mormons.
Oh, Mormons, yeah. They are. They're all about.
Their past history is
Very racist.
Which, by the way, we saw a map today, or yesterday when we were looking at research stuff. It was a map of the United States at the highest populations of church attendance. Guess who number 2 was? Mississippi. But number 1 was the Mormons. Utah was number 1. Mississippi was number 2. And then of course all the South was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I just thought that was interesting.
Okay. It is certainly easy to see that people in the United States and around the world differ physically in some obvious ways. The most noticeable differences is skin tone. Some have dark skin while others have light skin. Other differences also exist. Some people have very curly hair. Some have straight hair. Some have thin lips. Some have thick lips. Some groups are tall. Some are short. Usually such physical differences as their criteria, scientists at one point identified as many as 9 races. African, all those, I won't mention them all, but although people certainly do differ in many physical features that led to development of such racial categories, anthropologists, sociologists, and many biologists question the value of these categories and thus the value of the biological concept of race. For one thing, we often see more physical differences within a race than between races. For example, some people we call white or European, such as those from Scandinavian backgrounds, have very light skins, while others, such as those from Eastern European backgrounds, have much darker skins. In fact, some whites have darker skin than some blacks or African Americans. Some whites have straight hair, while others have very curly hair. Some have blonde hair, blue eyes, others have dark hair and brown eyes. Because of interracial reproduction going back to the days of slavery, African Americans also differ in darkness of their skin and physical characteristics.
I think it's about to give you some statistics.
Yeah.
I found this interesting about the black population and their racials. I shouldn't use the word race. Their genetic makeup. It's interesting.
In fact, it is estimated that about 80% of African Americans have some white European ancestry.
Yeah, that's what I was going to. This is fascinating to me, because then think in your mind, what is Black Lives Matter and all screaming for now? Reparations and money and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, figure this out.
So 80% of African Americans have some white ancestry. 50% of Mexican Americans have European or Native American ancestry, and 20% of whites have African or Native American ancestry.
So if I get 20%, can I get money? That's what I want to know. If I can find a 20% somewhere.
If clear racial differences ever existed hundreds or thousands of years ago, and many scientists doubt such differences ever existed, in today's world, these differences have become increasingly blurred. Another reason to question the biological concept of race is that an individual or a group of individuals is often assigned to a race on arbitrary or even illogical grounds. A century ago, for example, Irish, Italians, and European Jews who left their homelands for a better life in the U.S. were not regarded as white once they reached the United States, but rather as a different or inferior, if unnamed race.
So Irish people were not considered race when they showed up here. Isn't that interesting?
The belief in their inferiority helped justify the harsh treatment they suffered in their new country. Today, of course, we call people from all three of these backgrounds white. Or European. In this context, consider someone in the U.S. who has a white parent and black parent. What race is this person? American society usually calls this person black or African American, and the person may adopt the same identity as does Barack Obama, who had a white mother and an African father. But where's the logic for doing so? This person, as well as President Obama, is as much white as black in terms of parental ancestry. Or consider someone with one white parent and another parent who is the child of one black parent and one white parent.
Now you're down into the fourths.
This person has 3 white grandparents and 1 black grandparent. Even though this person's ancestry is thus 75% white and 25% black, she or he is likely to be considered black in the United States and may well adopt this racial identity. This practice reflects the traditional one-drop rule in the U.S. that defines someone as black if she or he has at least 1 drop of black blood. And that was used in the antebellum South to keep slave population as large as possible. Yet in many Latin American nations, this person would be considered white. In Brazil, the term black is reserved for someone with no white ancestry at all. If we followed this practice in the U.S., about 80% of the people we call black would now be called white.
So if we use the same definition as in Brazil, 80% of the people we call black would actually be white.
Those racist Brazilians.
What's that? Yeah, those racist Brazilians.
And this is, again, this is a sociology professor
I'm
at the
sure these are
University of
liberals.
Minnesota, okay? This is not Joel Meredith digging up some conspiracy.
Yeah, or even I actually like the fact that these aren't Christian sources right now. I wanted that. I wanted secular. What is the secular world telling us? Because what you realize is you have the real battle between science and religion. It's real science versus the religion of social justice. That's your fight.
That's right. So with such arbitrary designations, race, here's their conclusion, race is more of a social category than a biological one.
Now guess what? I'm still under later in the note. Your Bible told you that over 5,000 years ago. Keep going.
A third reason to question the biological concept of race comes the field of biology itself, and more specifically from the studies of genetics and human evolution. Starting with genetics, people from different races are more than 99.9% the same in their DNA. That's awesome. To turn that around, less than 0.1% of all the DNA in our bodies accounts for the physical differences among people that we associate with racial differences.
So your eye color, your hair color, your skin the tone of your skin, less than 1% of your DNA accounts for all that variation.
In terms of DNA then, people from different racial backgrounds are much, much more similar than dissimilar. Even if we acknowledge that people differ in physical characteristics we associate with race, modern evolutionary evidence reminds us that we all are really of one human race.
There's the answer to our question. What race are you? One human race. And we're going to look biblically why that is.
And I think we were going to skip this, right, Joel?
Well, yeah, I may have done that wrong. That's why I was questioning you this morning on that.
Okay.
Yeah, so skip over to, now we're going to do the little bracket. We're just going to do a few little brackets, the next page.
Okay, we're going to talk about Tiger Woods.
Yeah, we just thought this was interesting.
Interesting. As another example,
Yeah, so
the
he's smiling
famous
back
Tiger
there.
Woods.
Everybody says, Tiger was the first African American. When you look at
He
his
was-
actual genealogy, he's not even close to
Okay,
that.
so he's called African American by the news media, African American golfer, when he burst onto the scene of golfing in the late 1990s. But in fact, his ancestry is 1/2 Asian, divided between Chinese and Thai on one side, and 1/4 white, 1/8 Native American, and 1/8 African American.
He's actually less African American than anything else, with the exception of some Native American in there.
Yeah.
That's what's so funny, but he just looks a little more black, so we call him black.
So even though so little of DNA accounts for the physical differences we associate with racial differences, that low amount leads us not only to classify people into different races, but to treat them differently, and more to the point, unequally, based on their classification.
Can I interrupt you? And there's the issue. The issue is follow the biblical way of treating people, and race has nothing to do with it. First of all, race is a social construct that has nothing to do with it anyway. We're learning that, we understand that. Number two, you love your neighbor as yourself. You treat people as if they are your family members, and that God through you are pursuing that person to bring you back into the family. You just treat people the way God told you to treat people, and this disappears. This is no issue. It just drives me crazy.
So modern evidence shows there is little, if any, scientific basis for the racial classification that is the source of so much inequality. Ethnicity, because of the problems in the meaning of race, many social scientists prefer the term ethnicity in terms of speaking of color and other distinctive cultural heritages.
I like that too, but I actually prefer more of the kind of the religious term, and that is, we should not even use the word race. It's ethnicity, but the better term is just people group. They're just people. You see it all the time in the Baptist. You know, we send out people to people groups. And that's what it is. It's simply people groups. We're all the human race who have gathered together in people groups. There is no racial difference.
So ethnicity refers
biologically
to shared culture, social, historical experiences stemming from common national or regional backgrounds that make subgroups of a population different from one another.
And we could go into, and we may next week, we could go into well, actually, we were going to do a little Ken Ham. I know you like Ken Ham. We were going to do a little Ken Ham, and it just time-wise, we may go back and revisit a little Ken Ham next week. Where, you know, he talks, basically what he always says, it's, what does he call skin color? We're all tones, no, he meant melanin, but he calls it tan. We're all tones of tan. He just keeps saying tones of tan, tones of tan. That's what we all are. We're all tones of tan. And it's like, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we're done? Okay. Okay, how do we do this? Oh,
what we're saying is, notice the irony of the biological heterosexual marriage and biological gender.
This is the pitching deck of moral relativism.
I can tell you that women are X chromosomes and males are XY chromosomes.
So she can say, she can give you a biological reason why that's the way to understand your sexual orientation.
But they say, no. It's a social identity. It's what you identify as.
But then you flip to race and they completely flip. And it's a purely social construct. But by God, you better make your decisions on that social construct. And you're gonna pay for it, white guy.
And how dare the girl, you remember the white professor who identified as black and made everybody think she was black, and how dare she do that? Well, maybe she has like 1/16 of African American.
And what's her name? Who couldn't be more white, from the Northeast?
Warren.
The Senator Warren, who swore she was Indian or whatever.
Native American. She counts Native American in there.
That's why this whole, as a Christian, we have got to fight this idea of separating people into groups. Nobody wants to separate into groups more than Satan, because separation is division, and division creates conflict, and conflict takes you away from your one mission. It's really simple. We got to stay away from it.
Read Acts 17.
Yes, what is truly systematic racism? Oh, what about, what's her name? All right, we're going to play y'all Amalia. All right, we'll play y'all Amalia. How do you say her name? Amala. Anybody know Amala from PragerU? She's a real young 22-year-old African American who was part of Black Lives Matter. And she just realized this is wrong. So PragerU brought her in, and she's just a sweet, really smart, interesting girl. So we'll do a little 4-minute video on that.
Okay, so I'm going to take us to Paul engaging the people at Athens at Mars Hill, right? We read this before, but this is what got us back on it, is race. So Paul stood before the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that you're very religious in all respects, but for as I went around and observed closely your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship without knowing it, this I proclaim to you. The God who made this world and everything in it, who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by human hands. nor is he served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives life and breath and everything to everyone. For one man, he made from one man, get that, from one man he made every nation of the human race to inhabit the entire earth, determining their set times and the fixed limits of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope around for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us.
I just love Paul. So right there, that one, now we're going to give you some more, and we have to roll to next week, other passage, but in that one passage, Paul clearly tells you the biblical view that God made out of one race, the human race, he made multiple nations. So here's my comment. Yes, people are divided into groups in the Bible, just not racial groups. God divides one human race into nations. We did a whole study on this a few months ago. Where did he do that? It always goes back to the Tower of Babel. Everything about, I've learned this mainly through the work of Mike Heiser, how often we are constantly dealing with some theological issue in the New Testament, and you realize it always goes back to the Tower of Babel, the three rebellions in the garden, Genesis 6 and the corruption of the Nephilim, and then the Tower of Babel. It always goes back to those three rebellions. So that's your division in the Bible. And I was on my notes so I get it right. God divided one human race into nations. So the division is not racial, it's nationality for a reason. And there's a reason why. Genesis chapter 11 tells you what the Tower of Babel is all about. We studied that. Where did God divide? We got that, Tower of Babel. At the tower, humans for the third time refused to accept what were they told to do, what were Adam and Eve told to do, what was Noah told to do as soon as the flood was over, and what were the people at the Tower of Babel refusing to do. It's all the same thing. Anybody? What was Adam and Eve told to do?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply, spread out all over the earth. That's called the Edenic mandate. Then God realized they ain't doing it, and they're all a bunch of sinners. He sends, and the Nephilim have come, and they've corrupted the genome, all that stuff, and so he sends the flood. What is the very first thing he tells Noah as he's exiting the ark? He repeats the Edenic mandate, spread out over the, you read it, it's just like reading Genesis chapter 3 or whatever, the mandate. He does it again because he's rebooting society. And then what happens? You get a few chapters further, and you've got the Tower of Babel, and what's going on? We refuse. Come, let us build a city. Otherwise, we will be spread all over the world. Let us build a city and a tower to make a name for ourselves. What are they doing? We reject the Edenic mandate. It's all the same thing. Three rebellions. God told them what to do. They rejected that mandate, and that's why nations were created. God divorces the nations. What is he doing? He's saying, I'm going to give you, you don't want me to rule you. You continue to reject my law and my rule. I'm divorcing you, Genesis chapter 11. That's the whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview that we studied so much through Heiser. He divorces the nations in 11, but what does he do immediately in 12? He calls Israel. He divorces the nation. He puts lower Elohim in charge of those physical nations. He then says, but I'm calling out a portion from my own, and from that portion, this is all through your Old Testament, it is all through your New Testament. What is the goal of Israel?
What's the nations?
It's to win back the nations. That's what it is. And then, I'm saying this because it's so beautiful. And where does it start? Or where is it culminated? We talked about this several weeks ago. Come to the New Testament. Where is it?
Culminated?
And where is it culminated?
Pentecost.
It's Pentecost. That's what it is. He confused the language at Babel. What did he do at Pentecost? He brought all that language back together. Why? For one purpose, because the gospel started. The kingdom was declared at that point, and the gospel went out. He reversed what he did at Babel. And it's so beautiful. And the whole point, from the moment God divorces those nations, he lays out the plan to call them back to the line of the Messiah. And it culminates in the Holy Spirit. Not culminates. The kingdom is kicked off at the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and then we've been living for 2,000 years to do our one job, to get back the family that he divorced back then that chose their own way. It's the meta-narrative of the Bible. It all fits. And race divides us. There is no race. There's one family that God's calling. Why did God divide? We did that. The disobedient humans, what they wanted their own autonomy. How this divorce condition was to be temporary. I just hit that. Thus, your one and only mission, make disciples of all the nations. At Pentecost, we did that. It's not race, it's nations, people groups. God loves them and desires all to be regathered into his families. That's the bottom line. He loves every one of them. He wants them all to be regathered. Oh, that's not, oh wait, I have a conclusion here. Maybe said I did a good job. Okay. Let me see here. So this is the conclusion. What culture now calls race is a social construct meant to divide. It's a dialectic. God views race, Revelation 5, 6 through 14. Can you read it real quick? All right, we're gonna read it next week. That's just a gorgeous, it's the throne scene in Revelation. Y'all know what he says. It's every tongue and language. And so if you have some racist feeling, you want to be by a racial group, then you ain't gonna be happy in heaven. You're not gonna be happy in his, back here on earth, in his kingdom. You're not gonna be happy because they're all gonna be here, his whole family. Here's the last comment. The beauty of the gospel is that we are all equal and valued at the foot of the cross. Through Christ, we have redemption and live eternally as one human race, being equipped to join our spiritual brothers and sisters. Our destiny is a return to Eden, God's dwelling place, where God's entire family will be together, both the elder siblings and the prodigal ones. That's us. Isn't that cool? That pulls back the whole idea of the prodigal stuff, the elder siblings and the prodigal ones. Okay, don't be racist. That's the bottom line. Dear Lord, thank you so much. Thank you for these just incredible subjects and the clarity that your word can provide and what appears to be just hard cultural things that we don't know a true answer to. We do. We know the answer. You have told us how a man should live, how to walk humbly with you, how to love mercy, and to do justice. Father, may we do that. May we represent you well while we have this time to gather your family. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.